Imagine you're sitting in a quiet boardroom at one of the most prestigious universities in London. Professors shuffling papers, mumbling about budgets and curriculum updates, sipping their lukewarm coffee.
So the allocation for the research grants needs to be finalized.
Agreed. We should also consider the travel expenses.
Everything seems completely normal until you glance toward the corner of the room. And that's when you see him. A strange figure seated calmly, dressed in clothes from the 1800s. His pale, waxy face with vacant eyes fixed straight ahead. He doesn't move, he doesn't speak, he doesn't even breathe. Yet everyone around the table acts like this is totally fine. But this guy has been dead for nearly 200 years. This gentleman is none other than Jeremy Bentham, philosopher, social reformer, and today permanent resident corpse at University College London. According to the legend, every official meeting lists Bentham as, quote, Jeremy Bentham, present but not voting. And on those rare occasions when the council reaches a tie, his dried up hand is wheeled out to cast the deciding vote, always voting yes, of course, because even in death, Bentham apparently still loves stirring things up. But how much of this weird tale is fact, and how much is it just campus folklore? More importantly, what would possess a respected thinker to turn himself into a literal posthumous museum piece? Today, we're exploring this bizarre, unsettling, and strangely inspiring tale of Jeremy Bentham's auto-icon, a story where philosophy meets taxidermy and death becomes a permanent committee member, a visionary thinker who turned himself into his own greatest exhibit, chasing humanity's timeless obsession with immortality. And look, as weird as Bentham's story is, what if he wasn't alone? Imagine if this actually became the normal. Preserved relatives greeting you at home, historical figures lining your streets, and family dinners with ancestors permanently seated around the table. It sounds wild, right? But stick around. We'll get there. Let's meet the man himself, Jeremy Bentham. If you haven't heard of him, you're in good company. He's not exactly a household name nowadays, but back in the 1700s, Bentham was kind of a big deal. We're talking philosopher, political thinker, and social reformer. Born in 1748, Bentham was one of those guys who seemed to have opinions on absolutely everything, and he wrote thousands of pages to prove it. He tackled law, ethics, economics, you name it. But his biggest idea, the one he's best known for today, is called utilitarianism. Now, for those who don't know what that is, it's actually pretty simple. Bentham believed that the right thing to do is whatever creates the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. He's basically talking about if more people get joy out of something than suffer because of it, you're probably on the right track. And Bentham wasn't just some ivory tower theorist. No, he was the OG progressive activist, centuries ahead of his time. He called for women's rights. He wanted to abolish slavery and create universal voting rights before most people even considered these ideas. Bentham was known as a quirky individual. He named his walking stick Dapple, his tea kettle Dickie, and his cat, well, his cat's name was the Reverend Sir John Langbourne. Even feline clergy deserve respect, apparently. But Bentham genuinely believed in challenging traditional norms. To him, every custom, every law, every social habit was fair game to question. And that's exactly what led him to come up with his most bizarre idea ever, the auto-icon. Bentham looked around at Britain of his day and saw grave robbing to supply anatomy schools with cadavers, and he thought, hey, instead of digging up our dead, why don't we just volunteer? And a quick side note here, around the same era, infamous serial killer H.H. Holmes literally built a murder mansion to sell bodies to universities. It's pretty grim stuff, but it shows how desperate the medical world was for cadavers back then. And you could also make a killing monetarily. No pun intended. And if you want a deep dive on H.H. Holmes, go check out my wife Kimber's channel, linked here and in the description. Now, Bentham was an outspoken atheist who didn't care much about conventional burial customs. He saw a chance to solve two problems at once, provide science with necessary bodies, and maybe spark some deeper conversations about death itself. So he wrote down detailed instructions in his will, basically saying, after I'm gone, preserve my body, dress it up nicely, sit me down in a comfy chair. He even coined a catchy name for it, auto-icon, literally meaning self-image. Bentham was trying to be useful even after death, pushing social norms from beyond the grave, and maybe having a bit of fun at everyone's expense. Who knows? But when Bentham finally passed away in 1832, his friends carried out his last peculiar wish. His skeleton was meticulously reassembled, dressed in his favorite clothes, and placed in his usual chair. But there was a problem afoot. Or should I say ahead? Apparently, preserving heads wasn't quite perfected yet, go figure. The preservation went horribly wrong, resulting in a shriveled, terrifyingly grim head that even hardcore academics found unsettling. His friend and surgeon, Dr. Thomas Southwood Smith, attempted to preserve Bentham's head using traditional embalming methods, but unfortunately, the procedure didn't go as planned. Smith applied sulfuric acid and other chemicals intended to preserve the head, but instead, the process went disastrously wrong. The chemicals severely dehydrated and discolored Bentham's head, resulting in a shrunken, grotesque appearance. The head became dried out, leathery, and darkened with distorted features. And due to its disturbing appearance, a wax replica replaced the original, looking surprisingly realistic and way less creepy. But they took Bentham's actual preserved head and placed it at his feet. I'm not sure if Bentham was head over heels about this, but what do I know? But that's how Jeremy Bentham became a permanent fixture at the University College London. His bones in the chair, his clothing stuffed with hay, a waxen gaze stared blankly, ready to silently judge generations of college students and faculty alike. Now, you might think, why should I care about some old philosopher's weird last wish? Well, stay with me, because Bentham's story raises questions that affect every single one of us, like how comfortable are we really with death and remembrance? Since beginning his rather unusual tenure at UCL, Jeremy Bentham's auto-icon has inspired 2 centuries worth of legends, myths, and downright absurd stories. So let's play a little game called Bentham, Fact or Folklore. Legend has it that Bentham is officially counted at every university council meeting as present but not voting. Even better, if there's a tie, they supposedly wheeled his dry hand out to cast the deciding vote, always voting yes. But this truth isn't quite that macabre. Bentham isn't officially counted in every single meeting, but on occasion, the university has played along. On special anniversaries or important events, they've actually brought Bentham's body into meetings, listing him as present but not voting. So, partial credit for this one. Occasionally, reality dips its toes into the spooky end of the pool. Now for myth number 2. According to campus legend, a group of students once stole Bentham's actual head and used it as a soccer ball, kicking it around campus grounds. And the real story is actually not quite far off. In 1975, students from a rival university, King's College London, really did steal Bentham's preserved head as a prank, and they demanded ransom, £100, to be donated to a charity, or else they'd never return poor Jeremy's noggin. The university managed to bargain it down to just £10, and Bentham's head was returned unharmed. After this incident, the university decided that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to keep an irreplaceable philosopher's head just lying around. So they locked it away in secure storage, and Bentham's fragile head is only brought out now on special occasions. Myth number 3. Apparently, one night in the 1990s, students liberated Bentham's wax head, and the one sitting on top of his skeleton, and took it out for a little evening entertainment at a local pub. And this actually happened. There's photographic proof of Bentham's wax head enjoying a night out with some rather amused-looking students. And after that little escapade, university officials made some serious upgrades to security. And today, Bentham's body and wax head is safely housed in a modern alarmed display case. Now, these students clearly weren't afraid of the dead, but what if Bentham's crazy corpse-displaying dream had actually caught on? Imagine a world where auto-icons are common as statues, family photos, or even houseplants. Now seriously, Bentham genuinely thought that this was a fantastic idea. In fact, he wrote an entire pamphlet titled Auto-Icon, or The Uses of the Dead to the Living. Instead of burying Grandma, why not keep her embalmed and comfortably seated in your living room? Or if you need some life advice, you can just ask Great Grandpa over there in the corner. And it gets better, or creepier depending on your taste. Bentham imagined entire parks lined with preserved bodies of important figures. He even suggested country estates could line their driveways with their ancestors, alternating with trees for a pleasing aesthetic. Now, on one hand, it kind of does seem practical, right? No more expensive funerals, no wasted cemetery space, and visiting historical figures would get a whole lot more literal.
Say cheese, Will.
Like, why settle for a bronze statue when you can snap a pic with the actual Shakespeare? And if you're curious about my thoughts on Shakespeare, I left it in the cards and the description. But let's think about a world where the streets and homes are lined with our dead. Bentham's dream is a world filled with auto icons. But here's the big question. What would that actually do to us psychologically if that became our normal? Let's imagine it. You lose someone you love, a partner, a parent, a friend, but instead of burying or cremating them, you preserve them. They're physically sitting there, sitting quietly in the corner, unchanged. On the surface, it might seem comforting, right? But how does it affect the way we grieve? Psychologists say grief is like a journey, a difficult, painful path towards acceptance. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross famously described the 5 changes of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, then acceptance. We move through these stages because at some point we accept the finality of loss and move forward. But what if we never reach acceptance because we never truly experience the finality? Keeping someone physically present can interrupt that natural process of saying goodbye. It might feel comforting at first, but long term, it could trap us in denial, preventing us from fully moving forward with life. And psychologists call this complicated grief, when your sadness becomes a loop you can't quite escape. Seeing the dead physically preserved like that also triggers something psychologists call terror management. Basically, we naturally have a deep fear of our own mortality. No surprise there, right? When we're confronted too directly with death, we instinctively reach for anchors. Something real, something solid. It might be that old sweater that still smells like a loved one, a voicemail that we replay obsessively, or a photo we stare at until every detail is memorized. Maybe it's visiting someone's grave. You visit it over and over, arranging flowers that wilt too quickly, only to do it again next week. Or perhaps it's clinging desperately to habits that they've left behind. Maybe it's a morning routine, their favorite coffee mug, or even their Netflix queue. These tangible anchors can become more than just comforting. Sometimes they trap us in a place, stuck in a cycle of preservation instead of allowing us to truly heal. And constantly seeing preserved bodies might increase our anxiety. Instead of finding peace, we'd be constantly reminded of our own mortality, potentially becoming even more fearful, anxious, or emotionally withdrawn. But as we know, there's always 2 sides, because historically, many cultures have dealt with death by preserving loved ones physically, at least temporarily, and they found ways to do this without falling into constant anxiety. Take the Toraja people of Indonesia. They'll keep their deceased loved ones inside their homes, sometimes for months. Sometimes even years. They dress them up, chat with them, offer them food, cigarettes, morning coffee, and to most of us, that probably sounds unsettling, but to the Torahans, it's a loving and respectful way of gradually letting go. And we've also seen similar emotional attachments in Victorian England. Families would create jewelry from their loved one's hair. They would carefully make death masks and even took post-mortem photographs. These practices help make their grief tangible and comforting. But let's be clear here, preserving bodies isn't always purely psychological. Sometimes it's deeply spiritual. All over the world, human remains have been treated as sacred relics for centuries. In Catholicism or Buddhism, bones of saints or relics are treated like sacred treasures. Now, Jeremy Bentham himself wasn't exactly trying to become a saint. He openly mocked organized religion, famously dismissing religious doctrines as nonsense on stilts. Clearly, spiritual immortality wasn't Bentham's goal, he was just trying to make a philosophical point. But here's the thing, his bizarre plan still nudges us to ask, where exactly is the line between respectfully remembering someone and perhaps worshiping their bones? In most cultures where preserving remains is common, it's usually temporary or symbolic, tied directly to spiritual beliefs. Even the Egyptians, the ultimate mummy makers, saw preservation as part of the journey to an afterlife, not keeping someone permanently propped up in your living room. But Bentham's strange ideas kind of feel pretty modern when you think about the way that we preserve memories today. and we have new high-tech ways to do it. And psychologists genuinely wonder, do these new ways actually comfort us, or do they just stretch out our grief? Still, compared to Bentham's vision, today's methods seem pretty mild. Take cryonics, for example, freezing your body after death in hopes of future revival. But psychologists warn about something called ambiguous loss. Basically, if someone you love is technically still around, frozen in limbo, you might feel stuck, never truly able to say goodbye. And there's digital avatars. There are AI programs that will mimic the exact voice, texts, even jokes of someone you've lost. And then here's something that hits even closer to home: taxidermy. Preserving animals in lifelike poses. Yes, I know it's not humans, it's animals, but look, it's been around forever and it's still going strong. Hunters proudly display trophy animals on their walls, a sort of gallery of death celebrating their success. And even museums recreate entire ecosystems capturing nature frozen in time. It's different from Bentham's idea, sure, but it's still in the same ballpark, right? Because taxidermy gets pretty personal. Some people genuinely find comfort in preserving their pets after they pass away. They want to keep their furry companions physically present to still be part of their daily life. It's Bentham's logic, but applied to pets. And if we're talking about ballparks, what about cloning? Would you clone your loved one? I don't know. But reactions to this are complicated. Some find real comfort in seeing their beloved pets every single day, while others probably feel a bit unsettled. Another fascinating way that we're preserving parts of ourselves today is through tattoos. They carry deep symbolism, right? Think about intricate designs of the Japanese Yakuza, symbols of identity, loyalty, and even spirituality. But I'm not talking about getting tattoos, I'm talking about removing and preserving tattooed skin after someone dies. Do you think that deepens the symbolism, or does it cross into something creepy? And what about anthropodermic bibliopagy? If you don't know, that's the binding of books with human skin. Historically, it wasn't actually that uncommon. Doctors sometimes bound medical texts with skin from cadavers as a sort of weird form of tribute or remembrance. And other times, it was a form of punishment. We would take skin from criminals and turn it into a book. And believe it or not, some people saw it as an intimate way to literally become part of their own libraries. And this circles right back to Bentham's big idea. How comfortable are we, really, with physically preserving ourselves or loved ones? Is turning grandpa into the family photo album taking preservation a bit too far, or is it just another expression of our endless fascination with keeping the dead close? Okay, so do y'all remember the classic horror film Psycho? Now, spoiler alert if any of you haven't seen it, but Norman Bates kept his mother's body around, dressed her up, talked to her, and he definitely crossed the line of comfort to creepy. It wasn't exactly a healthy coping mechanism. And I know it's fiction, it's a movie, but look, Norman Bates wasn't entirely fictional. He was inspired by the real-life story of Ed Gein, a notorious grave robber turned killer who preserved body parts and skinned them at home to recreate his mother. Psychologists studied Gein and noticed some serious issues of attachment, grief, and psychological breakdown. He literally couldn't let go of his deceased mother. Obviously, Bentham wasn't Norman Bates or Ed Gein, but those extreme examples highlight something deeply human and deeply unsettling. There's a fine line between healthy remembrance and obsessive denial. Keeping someone physically around might begin as comfort, but without clear boundaries, it could easily twist into something much darker. Maybe it all comes down to knowing where those boundaries are. Maybe deep down we sense that never truly saying goodbye can damage us psychologically. Or maybe, if we're honest, death is just easier to accept when it happens to someone else. Look, there's no easy answer here. Maybe the urge to preserve comes from love, fear, or just our stubborn refusal to let go. But if Bentham's auto-icon idea ever became reality, maybe we'd end up trapped in grief instead of comforted by memory. Or who knows, maybe we'd adapt and invent an entirely new way of coping with permanent death decor in our living rooms. I'd argue that Bentham's bizarre proposal forces us to ask an important question. What's the healthiest way to hold on to someone that we've lost? Physically preserving them forever, or peacefully letting them become part of our inner memories? But what do you think? Could you live amongst the dead? Would seeing your loved one every day exactly as they were give you comfort, or would it just creep you out? Look, Bentham imagined a world where death wasn't hidden away, where loved ones remained physically present forever, a part of our lives. But as we've discussed, I feel there's a reason why his vision never took off, at least not yet. Preserving our loved ones physically might seem comforting at first, but it also risks trapping us in grief, preventing us from truly letting go and moving forward. And yet, in his weird way, I think Bentham succeeded at what he intended. Provoking thought, debate, and reflection about the very nature of death, our legacy, and memory. He made us question about how we remember people that we've lost, and whether holding on to them physically is truly comforting or just a haunting reminder of loss. Maybe Bentham's auto icon wasn't really a practical ideal at all. Maybe it was more like a weird philosophical dare. You know, a way of holding up a strange mirror and saying, hey, take a good look. How do you really feel about death? And maybe that's the best legacy any philosopher can hope for, not just to be remembered, but to make us genuinely think, question, and reflect. So now, I turn it to you. What do you think? Would you ever want an auto icon of someone you love? Or of yourself? Could you live comfortably with the dead? Or does something inside you say it's healthier to let go?
Good night, Mom.
And if you want more of history's mysteries or life's disturbing discoveries, make sure you subscribe and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear how you would like to be remembered. Bye!